Welcome to Echoes of the Unknown, the podcast where we explore some of the world's most fascinating unsolved mysteries. I'm Jack Montgomery, and today we're traveling back to 1997 when Amy Bechtel set out for a drive toward the Loop Road, a scenic stretch of Wyoming wilderness. She headed toward the Shoshone National Forest, a place she had explored many times before. Later that day, when her husband learned she never came home, a search began that would stretch across miles of rugged terrain and eventually into decades of unanswered questions. On Thursday, July 24, 1997, a young woman named Amy Bechtel left her apartment in the small town of Lander, Wyoming, and set out to handle errands like any other day. She was 24 years old, an elite distance runner with big goals, a steady routine, and a life built around the outdoors. By nightfall, she would be missing. By morning, her car would be found abandoned on a remote mountain road. And in the years since, the question of what happened to Amy Bechtel has never stopped haunting the people who loved her, or the community that watched the mystery unfold. Lander sits on the edge of Wyoming wilderness, where the town ends and the wide country begins. The Wind River Mountains rise in the distance. The air is dry. The sky seems bigger than it should be. For many who live there, the outdoors isn't a weekend escape. It's the backdrop of daily life. For Amy, it was more than just a backdrop. It was the center of her world. Amy was a gifted runner, disciplined, competitive, and intensely focused. She had competed at the University of Wyoming and had set ambitious goals for herself as an endurance athlete. Friends and family described her as driven and organized, the kind of person who made lists, kept her schedule tight, and treated training like a commitment. She also loved photography and the kind of solitude you can only find in wide, open country. A year earlier, Amy married Steve Bechtel, a well-known climber in the Lander outdoor scene. They were living in a place that seemed perfect for their shared love of mountains and movement, but later reporting and accounts from those around them painted a more complicated picture of their relationship, one that investigators would eventually scrutinize closely, as they do in nearly every disappearance where the answers are scarce. On the warm summer morning of July 24th, Amy left home at about 9:30 a.m. to run errands connected to a house the couple had recently purchased and planned to move into. That detail matters because it places Amy firmly in a normal routine, a busy day, a list of tasks, plans in motion. She wasn't someone known for disappearing. She was someone who had things to do. That afternoon at about 2:30 p.m., Amy was seen at a local photo shop in Lander. Employees later said she seemed to be in a hurry, checking her watch, moving quickly, as if she had a timeline to keep. That sighting is widely treated as the last clearly documented time someone confirmed seeing her in town. After that, investigators believe Amy drove out toward the Loop Road, a rugged route that winds through Sinks Canyon and into the Shoshone National Forest. It's a 70-mile scenic drive that begins and ends in Lander. In addition to offering breathtaking panoramic views, the Loop Road is also remote. In places, it is narrow and lonely, with long stretches where you might not pass another vehicle for a while. It's the kind of place people go when they want to be alone with their thoughts, or alone with the miles. There was a reason Amy may have chosen that route. She had been involved in organizing a 10-kilometer race in the area, and according to investigators and later reporting, she may have been scouting or practicing part of the course. Notes found later would support the idea that she was paying attention to mile markers and landmarks, as if mapping a route. And if Amy was doing what people believe she was doing, prepping for a race, training, studying the landscape, then the Loop Road made sense. Sometime after she drove into that wilderness corridor, Amy vanished. Her husband Steve returned home at about 4:30 p.m., according to multiple accounts that place him back in Lander by late afternoon. What he was doing earlier in the day has been described differently depending on the source. Some accounts say he was with friends and occupied with preparations related to the new house, while other reporting describes him traveling north of town to climb or scout climbing routes with a friend. What remains consistent is that he said he was not with Amy and that he returned to find she wasn't home. At first, he wasn't immediately alarmed. Amy ran. She trained. She kept busy. In an active household, someone being out for a few hours wasn't automatically a crisis. But as evening turned into night, that changed. By around 10 p.m., Steve called Amy's parents to ask if they had heard from her or if she might be with them. She wasn't. Not long after that, he contacted authorities. Friends also began searching, focusing on the most logical clue, Amy's car. They drove out of town along the loop road, following the same direction Amy was believed to have traveled. At about 1 a.m. on July 25th, in the early hours after Amy was reported missing, searchers found her vehicle, a white Toyota station wagon parked near the Burnt Gulch turnoff along the loop road. The discovery should have been the first solid step toward answers. Instead, it became one of the most unsettling details of the entire case. The car was unlocked. Inside were items that suggested Amy had been there and had left in a hurry or had been forced to leave. Her car keys were inside, as were her sunglasses. A handwritten to-do list was also inside. An ordinary scrap of paper that should have meant nothing, but in a disappearance, even the most ordinary object becomes evidence. And one important item was missing: her wallet. The scene didn't look like a wreck. It didn't look like an obvious struggle. There wasn't a clear trail of evidence leading away from the car. And in the hours after it was found, before anyone truly believed this could be a crime scene, friends searched the area in the dark, calling her name. In the moment, it still felt possible she was simply injured, lost, or unable to get back to the road. Daylight brought a massive, coordinated search. Search and rescue teams and volunteers combed the area on foot and on horseback. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters scanned the terrain from above. The landscape around the loop road is not gentle. It's a mix of forest and rock, with steep drop-offs, hidden gullies, and wide stretches where a person can disappear behind a rise and never be seen from the road. If Amy had been injured, if she had wandered off, if she had collapsed somewhere out of sight, the wilderness could conceal her. But as the search expanded, something became harder and harder to ignore. There was no sign of her, no clothing, no blood, no obvious broken branches, no clear footprints leading away from the car. According to one report, a footprint similar to Amy's running shoe was found along the loop road, but was destroyed before it could be properly preserved and compared. One of those small, painful details that can haunt a case for decades. If it was hers, it could have mattered. If it wasn't, it could have mattered too. Either way, it was gone. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the search effort became a story of absence. People were looking everywhere and finding nothing. When a person vanishes in wilderness, there are usually two major possibilities investigators weigh early on. The first is an accident, a fall, an injury, disorientation, exposure. The second is foul play, an abduction, an assault, a deliberate disappearance. In Amy's case, the evidence seemed to support neither in a clean, satisfying way. There were reasons to consider that it was an accident. Amy was alone, and she was in remote terrain. The loop road area can be dangerous. Weather can shift. A wrong step can become a serious injury. Even experienced outdoor athletes can make one mistake. But there were reasons an accident didn't fully fit. Amy was a capable runner and outdoors woman. If she had been injured near the road, searchers believed they might have found her. If she had fallen somewhere remote, the odds of finding at least some sign of her, something, felt higher than what the search was producing. Then there were the details that pointed towards something more troubling. Her unlocked car, her keys left behind, her wallet missing, the sense in the aftermath that she hadn't simply chosen to vanish. As the investigation continued, law enforcement did what they almost always do in a case like this. They looked closely at the person closest to her. In a disappearance where evidence is scarce, investigators often start where the emotional connections are strongest and the opportunity is greatest. That meant Steve Bechtel. For some in the community, that focus seemed automatic, even unfair. For others, especially some of Amy's family, it felt necessary. Over time, accounts emerged describing friction in the marriage. Some acquaintances and later sources suggested jealousy and control issues, while others maintained the relationship looked happy and normal from the outside. There were also reports that investigators reviewed Steve's journals and writings, searching for any hint of violence or intent, and that some of what they found raised eyebrows. There were writings about control, and, according to some reports, at least one poem described as revolving around murder and hiding remains. Supporters of Steve would argue writing isn't proof. Suspicious minds would argue it's exactly the kind of thing you can't ignore. There was also the matter of Steve's cooperation. Accounts indicate his attorney advised him to stop cooperating at a certain point, and that he refused to take a polygraph test. Again, to some people, that looked like guilt. To others, it looked like legal self-preservation in a case where suspicion had become a spotlight. Through it all, one central fact remained. Steve was never charged, and investigators never publicly presented physical evidence that proved he harmed Amy. The case hovered in that terrible space where suspicion thrives because certainty is missing. As years passed, other possibilities surfaced. One of them was the idea of a random abduction, a stranger on a remote road, a brief encounter that turned violent. The loop road isn't a busy highway, but it's not completely isolated either. People drive it for recreation. Hikers and climbers use it. Someone with bad intentions could have crossed paths with Amy, especially if she was alone and focused on a run or on mapping landmarks. And then another name entered the orbit of the case, one that would grow more prominent in later years. Dale Wayne Eaton. He was convicted in 2004 in the Lil Miss murder case. The kidnapping, rape, and murder of Lisa Marie Kimmel, an 18-year-old woman whose disappearance and death in 1988 shook Wyoming. Because Eaton was a known violent offender with a history that fit a broader pattern, investigators in Fremont County considered him when reviewing unsolved cases involving missing women. In 2013, the Fremont County Sheriff's Office publicly stated they believed Eaton may have had a role in Amy's disappearance, and a detective said they believed there was good reason to suspect his involvement based on interviews and information, including a tip from Eaton's brother that suggested Eaton was in the area around the time Amy vanished. They also described consulting with FBI profilers and other investigators while pursuing that line of inquiry. Even then, Eaton was not charged in Amy's case, and the mystery did not resolve into an arrest or a confession. In October of 2025, there was a new and unsettling lead. A property owner in Natrona County told investigators that Eaton had once lived on her family's land in the mid-1990s, around the same time Amy vanished. While going through the property, she said she discovered items that raised disturbing questions, and she asked authorities to bring in cadaver dogs to search the ground. Investigators called the tip worth checking out, but as of today, there's been no confirmation of any burial site or physical evidence tied to Amy. However, the lead underscored a familiar truth in this case. Even after all these years, investigators are still following every credible tip, hoping one of them will finally bring answers. That's the recurring pattern in this story. Leads emerge, suspicion shifts, and the core question remains unanswered. Amy was declared legally dead in 2004, 7 years after she disappeared. It was a legal step, one that often happens in long-term missing person cases, to address estate matters and allow families to move forward in a practical sense, even when emotionally they cannot. But in this case, the declaration deepened the divide. For some, it felt like a painful but necessary acknowledgement. For others, it felt premature or loaded with implications. In the public imagination, Amy's case became more than a missing person investigation. It became a kind of mirror that reflected the fears people carry about both wilderness and intimacy. Because there are two terrifying ideas at the heart of this case, and they pull in opposite directions. One idea is that Amy vanished into the landscape, that nature swallowed her, and the mountains kept her secrets. That's frightening because it means you can do everything right and still be lost, still be gone, still be erased by distance and terrain. The other idea is that Amy was taken by another person, whether a stranger or someone she knew. That's frightening because it means the danger wasn't random weather or bad footing. It was human intent. It was choice. And the evidence, what little there is, has never forced the world to choose only one. Over the years, Amy's story has been told and retold in magazines, books, and television programs focused on mysteries and missing persons. Her disappearance became one of those cases that people revisit because it contains all the elements that refuse to settle into a neat conclusion. A young athlete, a remote road, a car found in the dark, and nothing else. It's also a case shaped by the choices made in the first hours. Friends searched before dawn, people walked the area. No one preserved the scene like a crime scene because, at the time, no one wanted to believe it was a crime. They wanted to believe Amy was out there, waiting to be found. It's an understandable hope. And yet those early hours may also be part of why, decades later, the case still has so little physical evidence to hold on to. If you step back and look at what is known, only what is known, here's what remains. Amy left home on the morning of July 24, 1997. She was last seen in town that afternoon. She was believed to have driven into the mountains along the loop road to scout or practice a route for a planned race. Sometime after that, she disappeared. Her car was found in the early hours of July 25th near Burnt Gulch, unlocked, with her keys, sunglasses, and to-do list inside. Her wallet was missing. Extensive searches found no sign of her. The investigation examined multiple possibilities, including the possibility of involvement by her husband, and later the possibility of a connection to a known killer, Dale Wayne Eaton. No one has been charged. Amy has never been found. That's the case. Clean, cold, and incomplete. But real life doesn't stay clean and cold. It spreads outward. For Amy's family, the disappearance became a wound that never closed. For some, the suspicion directed at Steve became inseparable from their grief. For others, the absence of proof made that suspicion feel like another injustice layered on top of the first. For the community of Lander, the case lingered as a reminder that even in a place defined by open space and clear horizons, the truth can vanish. And for anyone who has ever run a quiet road alone or driven into the mountains to clear their head, Amy's disappearance can feel uncomfortably personal. It forces the imagination into the worst places. It asks you to picture a life interrupted, mid-stride, mid-breath, mid-afternoon. Somewhere out there, there is an explanation. It could be hidden in a canyon no one searched closely enough. It could be buried in a decision made by a person who has never spoken. It could be locked inside information someone once dismissed, or forgot, or was too afraid to share. It could be in a single detail that didn't mean anything at the time, until it did. And that's why, even decades later, this case continues to pull people back. Because disappearances like this don't just remove a person. They leave behind a vacuum that demands to be filled. Nearly 30 years have passed since Amy Bechtel vanished. No trace of her has ever been found, and the theories surrounding her disappearance continue to divide investigators and the public alike. The Wyoming wilderness where she vanished still holds its silence. The road where her car was found still curves through the mountains. The forest still stands. The distances are still vast. And the mystery remains what it has been since 1997. A young woman missing, a family without answers, and a truth still somewhere beyond reach, waiting, if it ever will, to be discovered. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Echoes of the Unknown. If you found this story compelling, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with fellow mystery lovers. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, while some mysteries fade with the passage of time, others are still waiting for their final chapter to be written.